Hi, and welcome back. My name is Sheldon McLeod. This is Thinking Out Loud. It's presented to you here exclusively on the Saltwire Network, and it gets busy in summer. And as we get closer to fall and back to school, noticing, vacation time is affecting businesses. In fact, a lot of businesses have had to close because of challenges with staffing. I know even in Halifax, trying to get the ferry between Dartmouth and Halifax, that's been delayed because of labor issues. There was a series of announcements made by the Government of Canada last week, including investments in foundational skills training. Thought this was interesting. We've recovered 115% of the jobs lost during the pandemic, according to this news release. And the minister who is responsible for making these announcements had an opportunity to visit Truro as well as Prince Edward Island and in Halifax. Workplace Learning PEI receiving some money for some of their programs to help Islanders with learning disabilities. This is all about putting more people back to work or helping those who may be underemployed. And the Minister of Employment, Workforce Development and Disability Inclusion is here to join the conversation. And we are welcoming the Honourable Minister Carla Qualtrough to our discussion. Good day to you, Minister.
Nice to see you. Thanks for having me.
I truly appreciate this, and I really do value interactions where we can ask governments and talk with government members about what's happening. Curious if you have any thoughts as to the interaction that Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland had last week with someone who was ultimately displeased with process and progress, but had been very personal in their attack. Has anything like that ever happened to you?
Oh my gosh, first of all, of course, that is completely unacceptable behavior. The anger, the inappropriateness, the harassment, the abuse, it's actually happening more and more to many of us. It's been happening, of course, to women politicians for, as long as I've been in this and certainly before it. But yeah, it actually has happened to me, and it's escalated since the last election, I would say. In fact, I recently had an incident here in Delta where I was confronted at a local store to the extent that the police got involved and yelled at and harassed. And I was very grateful that my children weren't with me because they could have been. But as a result, I've had heightened police protection at local parades and local events, and it's a whole new world.
And to what do you attribute that? What's happening?
Oh my goodness, people have been really confronted over the past 2 to 3 years with a lot of uncertainty, a lot of worry, a lot of angst. People have been isolated. The social media has kind of increased the echo chamber effect of people starting to kind of buy into their own rhetoric. I think it's just a combination of a lot that was happening before, but it's been significantly heightened. For some reason now, people feel like it's okay to treat people really, really poorly. I've always welcomed disagreement in my job. In fact, I like to know what people think we could do better, how people see what I've done as not meeting their needs. That's all helpful to me. And I've always welcomed kind of frank conversations and disagreement, but it's become deeply personal. The attacks have become angry personal attacks that are worrisome and that could escalate. People could get hurt.
I want to pivot to the good news announcements you had as government to offer more employment to help those who may be underemployed. There's a serious lack of labor force members. How will the remedies that you've announced help that? How will that fix this?
It's quite an interesting phenomenon, because I would say this time 18 months ago, I spent all my time thinking about how we could find workers for jobs. And now I spent all my time thinking about how we can find, the reverse of find jobs for workers. And now I'm spending all my time thinking about how to find workers for jobs. We have so many jobs that are unfilled in Canada. We've got such a significant labor shortage. This is the thing that is going to, I think it's the biggest threat to our economic prosperity. And so from a federal government's point of view, I was in Atlantic Canada last week, as you said, announcing investments in apprenticeships, announcing investments in maximizing workforce participation. So the way I've come to look at it and the way I've started talking about it is we really need to attack the labor shortage issue on all fronts, whether it's welcoming talent from around the world. So making sure our immigration processes are streamlined and we welcome and we are getting the best and the brightest here to Canada, both on a short and long-term basis. It's about preparing the next generation of worker. The two biggest sources of new entrants to our labor force are young people who are leaving school and immigrants. So let's make sure that we're supporting young people to have the skills they need for the jobs that are out there. But also maximizing workforce participation, which is something close to my heart, which is basically about, removing the barriers to participation in the workforce that these pockets of creative and talented individuals, whether it's Indigenous youth, people with disabilities, trying making sure that people have the opportunities to get the jobs that are out there. And then really it's about skills development. It's about allowing people to further, their careers to move to advance. And I think everything we do as a government has to be really focused on addressing labor shortages. So if you think of our broader investments in childcare and transit and housing, those are all about allowing people to work. If I can find a house near my job, I can work there. If I can afford childcare, I can go out into the labor force. If I can get there on a bus, then I can work. So to me, it's about really understanding that all these pieces fit into a broader labor shortage strategy.
We did talk about the issue of immigration. In fact, the colleagues at the Chronicle Herald wanted to know, is there perhaps a plan to even increase our immigration system, the numbers, in order to bring more skilled labor in?
Yeah, so this year, of course, we're welcoming hundreds of thousands of people to Canada, and I think that we absolutely will need to ensure that those numbers continue to grow, but we got to also make sure that our processes are as welcoming, as easy, as streamlined, as modernized as possible, because historically they always haven't been. And so I know that my colleague, Minister of Immigration, is really working hard, and I'm assisting kind of on the temporary foreign worker side to make sure that we get people in, that they get their work permits, that they get to the jobs they want. For me, of course, it's also about foreign credential recognition. So making it a smooth a transition from, to acknowledge and recognize the expertise and experience you have gained elsewhere in the world, and making sure we can apply it here in Canada. But yeah, I would say that there is an appetite to do more in immigration. Without scooping my colleague, I would say that's fair.
Okay. And when it comes to other issues, the folks at The Guardian in Prince Edward Island wanted to ask about mandatory paid sick days. Is there any movement in getting provinces to perhaps adopt similar situations where, if we run into a pandemic, where we're advising people not to go to work?
Absolutely. So, of course, the challenge for us as the federal government is we did it in areas of our jurisdiction, but we have to work collaboratively with our provincial and territorial colleagues to get them to do it in their provincial labor codes as well. So those conversations are definitely ongoing. And I know my colleague, the Minister of Labor, is working on it. I'm working on it with my employment minister colleagues. But we're definitely sending a very clear message about, if we learned nothing from the pandemic, let's learn that we don't want sick people to go to work and make other people sick. And we don't want people to have to choose between paying their rent and going to work because they need that pay. So I think, to me, that's got to be a foundational legacy of what we've all been through in the pandemic, is really to kind of unapologetically and proudly make sure everybody has sick leave, whatever job you're doing.
According to the Canadian Women's Foundation, women in Canada still make about 89 cents for every dollar a man makes. Your government has taken steps to enforce pay equity. Why is there still a gap?
Wow, that's one of the biggest questions I've kind of grappled with. In my pre-politics, I was a human rights lawyer and worked on these kind of issues. And, I think we are recognizing kind of the equity of value of the types of work we do, but we're not there yet. And so it's also about understanding that the work, work a man would do in a nursery to take care of our plants is not more valuable than a work a woman would do in a nursery to take care of our children. And so to me, that's the best example of kind of broader pay inequity. But never mind people doing the exact same job and not making the exact same amount of money, or making, God forbid, a woman earn more because she's more senior. It's something that I think the pandemic, I'm a very hopeful person, Sheldon, so you're going to get my bias here. But again, I think the pandemic really brought to the forefront important conversations of the value about care, and the care women in particular. Women were at the front lines of this pandemic, taking care of seniors, taking care of people who were sick. And so I'm hoping that there's been a kind of a consciousness raising through the pandemic, both from employers and just from the greater population, about the value of the work women do.
And that brings me to a follow-up question. In the St. John's newsroom, Telegram reporter Juanita Mercer has been covering an issue extensively, and this is the question she had for you. In that Newfoundland and Labrador Premier Andrew Furey says he will be finally, after 5 years of promising, take action on pay equity legislation this fall. Do you believe him? And what happens if that doesn't happen?
Well, let's be hopeful. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt, because I think that there are kind of moments in time where you can step up and do the right thing. And so let's say yes. Let's say that would be phenomenal. And if it doesn't happen, I think what we have to do is figure out what levers we have federally to encourage this behavior, to build requirements into our programs and get at the issue in the same way, but get at the same issue but in a different way. It's really tough, and it's really why these relationships amongst different levels of government are so critical to having these streamlined policies across your jobs, because of course the lived experience of someone in Canada isn't Section 91 and 92 of the Constitution. So it's very hard to explain to somebody why I have this job protection in my job at a bank, but I don't have the same protection in my job at a credit union next door, when what I do is the exact same thing as my friend next door. And yet credit unions are provincial and banks are federal. So it's trying to really, I spent a lot of time in the accessibility file, making sure that accessibility standards are similar, whatever the experience or whatever jurisdiction it's in. But it's across every file, I would say.
And I know there's going to be someone shortly telling us our time is up. But on that issue about pay equity and legislation, is this a human rights infringement?
Well, it is absolutely a human rights issue for sure. And it's been the subject of many human rights complaints and much human rights litigation over the course of the past 20 years. And in fact, I would say the human rights movement in Canada has benefited significantly from people who have fought this fight within the tribunals and courts. They shouldn't have had to. But the reason we have a federal system is because they did. And they're doing it across provinces. Again, they shouldn't have to. This shouldn't be how we advance issues. But we have a very robust human rights system in this country, and people are using it.
Minister, I know you have provided some information about the money, the numbers, the people you want to help. How will you be measuring it? How will you know if it's working?
Specifically around labor shortages, or
around labor shortages?
Oh my goodness. Okay, well, we're trying to measure everything. So that we're trying to really create rich data sets. So whether it's how many apprentices are trained through the apprenticeship service, how many get jobs coming out of their apprenticeship, whether it's how many people are trained through Skills for Success and then get durable working positions. There's so many stories from my time last week in Atlantic Canada about, someone who had an undiagnosed learning disability and was frustrated in their job and couldn't get ahead, and their employer didn't want to let them go, but it wasn't working out. And, this intervention allowed them all to understand where the challenges were and how to go around it. And all of a sudden this person is flourishing. I learned about somebody else who was in the program in Halifax and ended up in a position with a 30% pay increase because they had those skills and they understood they're not dumb, they're not incapable. In fact, they're pretty darn smart. They just learn differently than the rest of us. And so it was really empowering. Again, this is the workforce maximizing kind of the existing talent pools that we haven't drawn from, that we have to. We need every single working age Canadian out there working. People want to, but we also need people to.
I value your time. I know you're on to your next meeting. Minister of Employment, Workforce Development and Disability Inclusion, the Honorable Carla Qualtrough. Thank you, Minister.
Thanks, Sheldon. Nice to speak with you.